Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the True Life podcast. I hope everybody is having a beautiful day. I hope the sun is shining. I hope the birds are singing. I hope the wind is at your back. I have a great show for you today. And let me just go ahead and jump right in here and introduce all of you to Eileen Forrestal. We're going to step into a conversation about courage, transformation, and the power of living fully expressed. Our guest Eileen is here to ask us questions that may feel uncomfortable, yet are utterly essential. Are you truly living a life you love? That's a big question we're going to get into. Eileen's journey from a life in medicine as an anesthesiologist to one of vibrant self-expression is profound. For years, she helped people drift into sleep, but now her mission is about waking people up, awakening us to our potential, our dreams, and the passions we so often bury under fear and routine. Eileen's personal story, shared in her memoir, The Courage to Shine, is one of breaking free from the constraints of fear and silence, finding her voice, and empowering others to do the same. Through her coaching, speaking, and her inspiring Get Up and Go diaries, Eileen is helping thousands of people worldwide step out of the shadows and into a life that is purpose-driven, authentic, and alive with possibility. With wisdom forged in her own journey, she invites us to confront what's holding us back so we can finally blossom into who. Eileen, thank you so much for being here with me today. How's your day going?
Day's going great so far. Beautiful autumn day here in the northwest of Ireland. Lots of
Very nice.
dry leaves, which is lovely.
Yeah. Isn't it interesting that here we are in the seasons of change and there's so much change happening and you have this message of change that's inspiring people on some levels. How did you, maybe you could fill us in a little bit of a backstory about how you found your voice and how you came to embrace uncertainty and change?
Well, I think you've given quite a concise intro there, just at the beginning. I think you've almost said everything. But yeah, and it did take me writing a book to join the dots step backwards. You know, I kind of find that you know, sometimes you have to do that to get a good perspective on your life. You start from where you are and you look back, you think, how did I get here?
Right.
And notice really what were the, you know, turning points, tipping points, you know, what were the sort of the little steps along the way. So yeah, you know, where do you start? Like day one. But I suppose really what you're maybe asking was just the kind of the journey really of self-expression. You know, I didn't use my voice very much when I was a child. I tried to use it, but I had a stammer. You call it a stutter. I had a stammer. And I thought the best way to not let people know about that was to say nothing. And if you didn't say anything, people thought you were normal. So I spent a lot of time looking like I was normal. And but you know, you kind of realize it's a very kind of a limited life because you don't get to say what it is you want to say, no matter where. And obviously, you know, I would speak when I was relaxed and, you know, when it was kind of easy and there was people around me that I knew, but that was a very tiny comfort zone. And then anything outside of that, and really, you know, silence was the only option. So it took something to break out of that, definitely, and say, well, wait a minute, there's nobody going to extract the words from my throat. You know, they took out my tonsils, but there's no one coming to get my words. And at some point, kind of say, well, if it needs to be said and I really want to say it, well, nobody else is going to say it. So give it a go. So here I am.
Yeah, it's interesting to think about how many of us, myself included, and I know so many people that live a life that we think we're supposed to live instead of living a life that's meaningful to us. And that only comes when you find the courage to embrace yourself and embrace your voice and stand up for what you believe in. But it seems it's for me, I found it difficult because the culture has all these preconceived notions of what we're supposed to be. It has these preconceived package ideas of what success are, of what relationships are. But that isn't really the case. That kind of seems to be a facade on some level. It's hard to find yourself in these preconceived ideas and speak out. At least for me, did you find it? Did you find yourself influenced by these other people's ideas and other people's voices and this constant messaging around you?
Well, there was certainly that, and there was a way to fit into that. you know? So other people did other things, like other people didn't do what I did. So even though we were in a, you know, a same society, then other people seemed to, you know, there was actors and singers and there was all sorts. But on the path that I was on, I was sort of thinking, well, how did I kind of wind up on this one? So um yes, I conformed, I suppose, really to what I felt was going to keep me kind of comfortable and safe and not be exposed. So, you know, other people obviously chose differently, but I think, you know, certainly, I mean, my family encouraged me to speak, and why didn't I speak up? And I'm saying, no, I can't.
Mm. Yeah.
And, you know, yes, I was clever, you know, I could pass exams, and somebody had told me the longest course in college was medicine. And I thought, well, I can hide in college for like 7 years. That'll be handy. Now, nobody told me to go to college and hide there. I just thought that'd be a good thing to do. And, you know, I kind of found anesthesia, which was kind of a very nice job for, you know, a
Yeah.
quiet person like me, and all of my patients being asleep for the most part.
Mm.
And I suppose, but just when I looked at other people and looked at other expressions in life, and I thought, there's something missing over here with me. It's like I'm not having as much fun as I could be having. So I did actually, I was invited to an entrepreneur retreat once upon a time, and I wasn't an entrepreneur. I was a doctor. I said, I'm not an entrepreneur. But anyway, somebody had been noticing that, you know, I'd been working away on the diaries, just, you know, quietly, kind of behind the scenes, and creating these books. And they said, did I want them, you know, global? And I thought, that'd be great, you know, global. Like, so anyway, you know, I took myself off to Bali for a month, and I got kind of to play there as a kind of a different kind of a person than an anesthetist. So, you know, the whole world of kind of entrepreneurship and speaking and, you know, Facebook Live and all of these other things to expand the brand. And I thought, oh, this is actually me. This is way more me than, so I retired out of medicine, and this is kind of what I'm at now. So I just kind of felt, and then I, you know, I really got into what I was doing with the diaries was all around the power of words. And I
Mm.
thought, you know, so instead of putting people to sleep with drugs, I thought, well, what about waking people up with words? Because it's always a conversation that kind of wakes you up. It's a conversation with somebody that encourages you, or it's a conversation with someone that inspires you. And it's like, oh gosh, you know, they're just like conversations, but somebody can say something and it can change your life. So I'm all for those kind of conversations.
Yeah, it's wonderfully said. It seems to me change comes from one of two ways, whether it's inspiration or desperation. And I think most people find themselves in front of both of those animals at some point in time. What can you speak to that idea? Like, I'm sure that there was when you spoke about stammering or when you spoke about
Yeah.
hiding in college. That sounds like desperation to me on some level.
Exactly. I think possibly inspiration possibly comes from a level of just desperation, you know,
Yeah.
maybe
Yeah.
because yes, you know, it becomes, certainly as you get older and you realize that, well, you know, things aren't necessarily, you're kind of doing all the right things, you know, in terms of, you know, society, you're doing all the right things, and you think you're kind of on this path, which should be leading somewhere. And then you kind of think, well, actually, I'm not there yet. It's like, when am I going to be there? And it's like, I'm still not there. And so at that point, maybe not that it's desperation, but it does assume a certain kind of a resignation. And
Mm.
then somebody comes along and says something, and that's kind of inspiring. I think, oh, whereas had I not been quite so desperate, I might not have heard that little voice that said, why don't you try this? So, not, you know, because you can sit out, you know, it's like, it's not a problem. You know, our life was fine. I was quiet. It was fine. You know, I am technically, you know, successful. I had all of the trappings of success. But all I really kind of, when really somebody said it, what I got was missing was my voice, like my actual, what I felt was like a, you know, stuff that I wanted to say. And I just didn't get around to saying it because I was just too scared to kind of, you know, open my mouth and say something. So I'd answer very briefly, very
Mm.
fast. I could speak really quickly,
Mm.
and just to get the words out really fast. And whether you got them or not, that was like neither here nor there. But so yeah, inspiration, I think, can come from a little bit of desperation. When you're desperate, maybe you're looking for inspiration. That's what I say.
Yeah, that's well said. I'm curious if we look back to the life of an anesthesiologist, It must be on some level odd and fascinating to be putting people to sleep on some level, because I would imagine the people you're seeing, even though the relationship you may have with them might be short-lived, like you are talking with someone in a really vulnerable state. Like, what is that relationship like between an anesthesiologist and the person they're working with?
Oh, it's quite extraordinary, really. I suppose the first thing you realize is trust, that,
Hmm.
you know, somebody is trusting, you know,
Mm-hmm.
themselves, their mother, their child, their partner, they're trusting you to take care of them. So it's a huge responsibility. So I do get there's a big privilege in actually having that job, and I did love it. And I just and then there was that sense of kind of like the miracle of it. It's like, I had certain drugs, and of course I had all my exams. I knew exactly how to, I knew exactly what happened. But really, I used to say, really? Like, really? What's actually like, how do I do this? How do these drugs do this? So, we know more now maybe about the brain now, but my textbook, as I say, exam passing, and then the actual, witnessing this, this drifting off to sleep and drifting back. And sometimes, after 3 hours asleep, the person waking up would continue the conversation that they had as they were drifting off to sleep, as if the 3 hours had never happened. And in that 3 hours, something life changing could potentially have happened. So it was it was a great career. I loved it. Very interesting, a privilege, and you get to interact with all, from premature babies, pre-babies, preborn babies, from the labor ward, all the way up to, intensive care and, elderly in theater and, having their hip replaced and having new cataracts or something. So it's always really that lovely sense that you really, really were
Mhm.
making a difference in some people's lives. Amazing.
Thank you for that. There's no doubt in my mind that you have made a big change in people's lives. In that particular exchange, I'm hearing the ideas of trust and awareness. And it seems to me like those could be the catalyst for profound change, whether it's a life-changing operation or whether it's getting the courage to shine on some level. Like maybe we could stop and talk about awareness for a little bit, because you are clearly an expert in awareness and fading into consciousness, fading out of consciousness, becoming a better version of yourself, maybe slipping back into a version of yourself. It's almost like a tide. But can you give me your thoughts on awareness?
Well, there's obviously the practical awareness, we're all aware,
Yeah.
we're aware of, our surroundings. We're aware that we're awake. We're not aware when we're asleep. But yeah, so there's kind of a general awareness. But sometimes we're not really fully aware maybe of, maybe things that we say to people, or how other people maybe
Yep.
are impacted around us, or we're not necessarily aware of things outside of ourselves. If they're at a distance, we can sort of separate ourselves. And yeah, maybe we're not always aware. Somebody said to me, the last person to see you walking into a room is you. So we're also always maybe not aware of how, something might alter in a room when we walk in. You might
Yep.
notice if there's like silence, or there's,
Right.
oh, hello, she's arrived. But in general, we might not be aware of how, how as I say, it's very clear when people are asleep or awake. Like in my job, awareness, unawareness, or conscious or
Right.
unconscious. And yeah, but perhaps in our day-to-day lives, we're not fully aware, really, because we're just maybe not, we're just a little bit more preoccupied with what goes on in our own heads, and maybe we're not even aware of how much goes on in there that doesn't really that doesn't really impact our outer lives. But yes, I think awareness is a very interesting concept.
Yeah. I've heard it said that, there's like that part of your brain that's like the reticular activating system. And when you notice something new, if you get a new car, pretty soon you see that new car everywhere. If you buy a new sweater, pretty soon you realize a couple people have that sweater on and some stuff. And I'm curious, is it the same? Do you feel like it's that same sort of awakening to awareness that allowed you to see your life differently? Like once you began to see yourself in this new light, did you always begin to see yourself that way? Was there an awareness there of like, hey, this is kind of who I am? Once you went to Bali and you were like, this is who I am. Like, were you more aware of that, who you were when you figured it out. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, maybe there's a kind of a recognition somewhere,
Yeah.
that, somewhere along the line when your brain was kind of, developing, it was
Right.
going on a certain track,
Hmm.
maybe. And then maybe it went off track. And then you're kind of aware that you're sort of off track, but you're not quite sure. And then maybe when you get back on track, it's like, oh, this feels more, this feels more like it. This feels more like maybe, I don't know whether that's your genetic or your inheritance or your legacy from, earlier generations or whatever. Is it built into your DNA? Who
Yeah.
knows? And then we thwart it ourselves, and, sometimes I get a little bit, I challenge the education system, which I think, is a little bit more academically programming us than
Hmm.
maybe can be just fostering what's maybe a little bit more for the self-expression in ourselves. So I just feel that sometimes our schooling system kind of puts you on a certain track, and then you either succeed in that system or you don't succeed in that system, in which case people feel they're failed in that, and then they feel that. Whereas there's so many other expressions in life, and we see the one that's rewarded seems to be the one that comes through an academic program, which is not actually true, but sometimes on the it kind of looks in the academic world anyway. But and then you see all the successes that people have when they're fully expressed and they're fully doing what they're really, really great at, what they love to do. They love their life, they love their business, they love their work, and then they seem to be, really what I would call successful, as opposed to sometimes you can be successful as society might see it, but not experience that whole, you know, whatever the experience of really being successful is in life.
Yeah, it's a great point. But it does take courage, and I think a big pitfall that myself and other people I know fall into is, you know, there's a lot of questions that come up when you want to be your authentic self, when you want to succeed at something that you love doing. Like, what if you're responsible for other people? What if you hold yourself accountable to the expectations of others? Like, there's these big questions that we really have to do some soul searching on to allow ourselves to find that courage to be successful. Can you speak to some of those ideas? Like, what were some of the obstacles you had to overcome in order to find the courage to do it? What was that like?
Well, I think you sort of go back to fundamentals, fundamentally, like what does it really kind of mean to be successful? We'll say, when I look back, what I really wasn't successful at, I felt, was just interacting with people. Like I was successful at reading, I was successful at passing exams, I was successful at doing all of those things, but I wasn't successful at like being popular. I felt I didn't really have that many friends because and really, so even when you're small, there's kind of fundamentals. You just want to belong. You just want people to
Yeah.
like you, and it's maybe not that hard. But then when you start hiding that and pretending that you don't care whether people like you or not, or you don't care that then maybe that's some of the pretense. Whereas when you're authentically saying, well, look, can we be friends? Or just, I think maybe it's more simple than we make out. And certainly it takes courage to say that, like I do say it in the book, a lot of my anger was directed at my mother. And,
Hmm.
it kind of, she would seem to be say, coaxing me, to like speak properly and slow down and relax and be calm and all of those things where I'd be like completely the opposite. We'd be like, I can't. And, we'd have these like really frustrating kind of arguments or whatever interactions. And then to kind of go back really and with her and sort of say, look, I'm really sorry. I was so mean and horrible. I wasn't mean and horrible. When you're 13 and you're 14 and you're 15 and you're frustrated and you think it's all your mother's fault somewhere. So sometimes it takes courage to go back and say, look, I played my part, I didn't slow down. I didn't relax. I didn't do all the things you advised me to do, which, perhaps I could have done with a little more patience.
Probably not.
Maybe not.
Probably not. Like sometimes, like sometimes I think it's all necessary. Like
It's
all of
all
those,
necessary.
it's
Yeah.
necessary, right? Like you
Every
have
bit
to
of
go
it.
through that.
Every bit of it. Yeah. Every step.
Yeah, like that's part of the journey. Like you have to get upset, and usually our parents take the brunt of it, and they had their role in it too. It's difficult to go through life and become actualized and find the courage to do what you want to do, because there's a million reasons not to. There's a million reasons to not do what you love. There's a million reasons to hide behind ideas like safety or security or all of these things. And the truth is, maybe your ideas of success that you've given yourself are unrealistic expectations. Maybe this idea of success you have for yourself is unattainable. So you've just been chasing this, you've just been chasing your tail. It's tricky. It's tricky to figure out, and that's where the courage comes in. Like you might fail, whatever that word kind of means. What if we're on that? What is it possible to fail? Is failure just practice? Or when I say failure, what do you think of?
Well, it's a word, we learned words in school,
Yeah.
failing was failing exams. That's the first
Yeah.
time you learn a word. That's the first time I heard a word fail.
Yeah.
And it was about failing an exam. And, you don't really get the concept of failing in life or failing, maybe you failed to, I don't know, maybe you, I don't know, fell off your bicycle or you failed to get, no, whatever it was, I don't know, there was different things, but it
Yeah.
assumes a kind of a more significance as you go through life. And then you regard yourself, oh, am I a failure? What does that mean? Am I a failure? I said, well, I'm not a failure at this. I'm a failure at that. I'm a failure to, I'm not very good in the kitchen. I'm not a great cook. I could cook up drug combinations of drugs for a really tasty anesthetic, but I'm not very good for a dinner party. But so but I consider myself a failure at that. Not really. Somebody else is much better at it. They enjoy doing it. If I really want to do it, I'm sure I could get good at it. So yeah, I'm not sure where our notions of failure come from. But I do
Yeah.
think, that I think exploring yourself, exploring that the journey that you make yourself, you're talking about awareness or that courage. It is to actually, just sit down and say, look, am I where I want to be? Like really, and where am I? Really, and how did I get here? And if I keep going the way I'm going, where am I going? So that just sit down. That takes a bit of courage to actually go and do that. That's why I say writing writing a memoir and joining the dots backwards is a very therapeutic exercise and very
Yeah.
enlightening. Mhm.
Yeah. How was that process for you? Did you feel as if something was writing through you, or some people have different ways to express the way they write, but what is yours?
No, it was, again, look, I never thought I was going to write a book. It never occurred to me to write a book. But, every so often I would, you know, say a little bit about myself or about my life or where I was. And then somebody said, oh, you should write a book. I thought, really? He said, oh, that might help somebody. I said, really? Okay. I suppose my whole life has been about helping in some
Yeah.
level. So it did take me 13 years to write it, believe it or not. It never really meant to see the light of day, you know.
Mm.
But I said, look, I said I would do it. I promised this person I would I would write this book. And I suppose when I started it, it was kind of all over the shop. And then I said to somebody that I was writing it, and they said, did I want some help? They happened to be a book writing person. I said, oh, yes, please.
Mhm.
So somebody took it and sort of said, well, what are you trying to say? And what's your message? And what's all this thing? So you go through the process of it. So that was like the first iteration. And then, maybe somebody else would say, and then you kind of think, oh, that's kind of interesting. I should do that. So I was always trying to turn it around to see, would it actually benefit a reader?
Mm.
Like it's all very well writing it from a writer's point of view, but I never even really considered myself a writer. And it was just somebody who was just writing this story of my life because somebody thought it would be a good idea. And so here I am. So yes, it kind of came through time and time. And anyway, apparently it's getting some good feedback. So I'm
Mm.
pleased that somebody somewhere might be getting some value from reading it. It's a
Yeah.
struggle. It's a struggle. It's not just no. I didn't feel it was channeled, and I go, this was easy. No, this wasn't easy. This was just this took a lot of and it takes more than one person. I think you do need somebody, a coach or a mentor or some other writing person who can cast a cold eye and produce a better product.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I think that that's probably true in most aspects of life. It's one life with our view, but if you have someone writing next to you or a team of people that will be honest with you, you can get a way better perspective of what's on the road or coming down the road or what you just ran over on some level.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like life, it's always good to be in a
It is.
dialogue with somebody, give your perspective.
Yeah.
Because you can have your own view, which can be very, very, very sensible as far as you're concerned, and then somebody else can hear it and say, "Really? Is that really what
Yeah.
you think? Like, really? Have you have you have you thought a bit more about that?" So,
Yeah. It makes me thankful for all the people that wanna argue with me, because how else would you know what you know unless you had someone to challenge your point, right? It would be so boring if we all thought the same thing. It would just be like, "Yep, this is it." It's kinda
exactly,
funny to think about.
exactly. Yeah. And in a good, robust conversation with somebody, you hear yourself saying stuff
Yeah.
stuff that you wouldn't otherwise, so you do need to be kind of willing to have those kind of robust conversations where you can find out, again, it's your own expression, that your own self-expression, that you're willing. And that takes courage sometimes. Sometimes you might not be popular because you can say something that maybe, you think, God, did I say that? And then
Mhm.
somebody else say, did you say that? And I think, oh yes, I said that. And oh yes, you said that. So now you have to kind of own the fact that you said it. And you think, well, why did I say that? Well, actually, I believe that. So that's kind of my view, and that's kind of what I see. And then somebody else can see it differently. And you think, well, actually, that's just because you're standing over there and I'm standing over here. And from where I'm looking at it, that's how it looks. And from where you're looking at it, that's how it looks. So, there you go. So is the world. There's 9 billion of us, nearly.
Yeah, children are the best for that. Like, sometimes you're like, "Oh my gosh, that's what I sound like? That's me. I sound like that. Whoa, I better curve this thing right here, on some level." And it's a great way to establish patterns. Like, you can really begin to see your patterns of thought in the language you use if you're willing to take an honest look at it. And I'm sure that must have happened in the writing process for you.
Well, yes, it's really interesting. Sometimes I might be writing something and, I think it's all very, you know, very kind of new and fresh. And
Yeah.
I'm writing this and I'm writing this. And then actually, I might find, a blog or something that I wrote maybe 2 years ago and it's the same. And I think, oh, it's like, oh, it's not that much different. So yeah, you could kind of, I think really we don't really veer so much from ourselves. We have our patterns, like you said, we have our thought patterns and we have different kind of conversations or thoughts we've had over time, but they kind of become pretty much kind of who we are. And then, they can come out and we think, here's me thinking, oh, it's brand new. And it's like, oh no, it's not. I wrote about this before. That's a blog I did like 3 years ago. Hmm. That's why Google,
So
you
we
see,
got our
this is it. You see, we have our
Yeah.
cyber footprint, which will never be forgotten.
Yeah.
Once upon a time, people would forget.
Yeah. It's interesting though, like the role of the storyteller. We can look back to the oral traditions of like the Greek tragedies or, all these different myths that come to us from all different parts of the world. And so much of our story is intertwined into those stories on some level. If you were to look at your story as a mythology, what would it be most closely aligned to, you think?
That's a really hard question. I have
I know.
absolutely no idea. I have no idea.
It is a
Here
tough
in
one,
Ireland, we're storytellers here in Ireland, and
right?
we just tell stories, and I don't know. I suppose it's just stories are just various things that happened. We probably didn't, I don't know, look for messages in stories. It was just how somebody illustrated a point. So if you have a point, maybe there'll be a story about it. But now we have the story, and now we're trying to find. We're looking at it from the other way around because I suppose storytelling has become so. We're now kind of analyzing, I suppose, a little bit more. How important the story is. But when we were reading, I mean, I was reading stories from the Bible once upon a time, and they were just kind of they were little stories that try to illustrate a small point, as in maybe humanize a point and make it relevant to a person. But then you could have stories about pets, and you had stories about birds, and you had stories about trees, and all sorts of things. So it's hard to know where stories fit in. As for my own story, I have no idea where it would fit into any kind of pattern or mythology or whatever. Somebody sometime might say it in 100 years' time. Say, "Oh, there was a story about that girl once."
Yeah.
I'll
Yeah,
have to wait for the ending.
yeah, exactly. Exactly. Inspiring, I would imagine, is probably something that comes to mind. And I think that's the one thing that we can all hope for, is that we live a life that on some level could inspire others, or better yet, could give a tool to somebody else. Maybe in all of our stories, and I like to think this, I think that in all of our stories, there's a lesson for someone else to learn if they're willing to take the time to listen or read the story that you put out there. And if you think about it from that angle, I think that kind of way of looking at your life as a story, looking at yourself as the main character in a novel, is a kind of a good way to see yourself through life, because that gives you the options to be like, okay, I'm the hero in this story, or I'm the protagonist in this story, or, however you want to put yourself into that story, you can begin to live your life in a more artful way, I think, in a third person or in a story-like setting. Is there a particular way that, like, when you look at your life, do you see yourself as a character in a novel, or, how do you, what's your philosophy on life when it comes to living a life worth living?
Mm. Oh, well, I'm definitely a character in a novel, except it's not a novel, it's a memoir.
Yeah, right.
It could just as easily be a novel. It could just as easily be, but it's actually all true. But yes, I used to always fantasize if I was going to give myself an ideal career when I was little. I mean, Shirley Temple was she was my kind of guru, and I wanted to be in every movie that she was in because she had like multiple lives, and I wanted to be in all of them.
Mm.
And then I thought, oh, being an actress, that'd be a great way to live like all these multiple great lives. And they were all stories. I mean, there were stories that somebody wrote, but then somebody actor comes along and they get to play this character. So yeah, I think we're all we all have that. We all have that capacity. And I suppose you get in a book as well. You write your own story. There's nobody else coming along. I'm not reading somebody else's script. I promise you, it's my script.
Yeah.
So I get to be the author, and as I say, I get to be the author and director and the actor in the story of
Yeah.
my life. So I suppose really, if everybody, I think I really alluded to that in the book. It's like we all have that. Somebody said once, "We're the hand, the chisel, and the stone,"
I like that.
and you know, it's we're kind of we're carving our own David masterpiece out of a lump of concrete. Nobody else is doing it for us. Okay, we've emerged into planet Earth in human form, and we've a lot of capacities. But yeah, I think we can create ourselves as we wish. There are people doing all sorts of things in all sorts of places, in all walks of life, and any one of them is probably open to us if we see it and think, God, if it's possible for that human being, maybe it's possible for this human being. And then it takes then it takes like courage. I'm not going to go and live in Papua New Guinea or somewhere, but I could.
Yeah.
If I really wanted to, I'm sure I could. And people have done extraordinary things, and they're the stories is looking, gosh, look what they did, and whether it's a novel or not, because even a novel, some person has written it, so it was in their imagination anyway. And somebody will come along, and maybe Tom Cruise or somebody will play the actor in the movie. So it all gets it could be all. Yes, I think we're all capable of being great actors in great movies if we write a great script.
Yeah. Yeah, I do too. I could come back to this idea of courage and having the ability to believe in yourself, to translate your vision into reality. I get to talk to lots of people, and I know that you do some consulting on the side. I'm wondering, it seems to me a big stumbling block to courage is sometimes like shame and guilt. Have you ever had to work with someone, or maybe in your life, you have come up against these two guardians of despair, of shame and guilt? What's your thoughts about shame and guilt, and how do you move past it?
Well, look, I think it's part of the human condition as well, and maybe not even human. I have a Cocker Spaniel. She often looks very guilty. It's like we do know when we have something to be
Right,
guilty about.
right.
But I think as we grow up, if we look at the source of some of the guilt, then and really be a little bit dispassionate about it, and look back and say, well, look, it was appropriate. Like I was very ashamed of having
Mm,
a stammer, and then I was very guilty about blaming my mother. And but when I kind of look back at it and think, well, wait a minute, okay, I was 7 or 8, they were all, mocking me. It was okay to be ashamed of that. But I'm not ashamed now that I had a stammer then.
mhm.
It kind of made me into who I am now. So I have to kind of really be grateful, I suppose, in a way, because I wouldn't have this kind of life now if I hadn't had that life then. And the same with my mother, had I not kind of really kind of reconciled and sort of look, gosh, I really was guilty of that. I really need to apologize for that. That was something that it's not like it's a crime or anything, but really it wasn't something that I would admire about myself. So to go back and acknowledge that and sort of say, look, I'm guilty of that. I'm sorry, and I won't do it again. And then move on. So I think there is that sense of really locating the source of shame and guilt, and then bringing yourself into the present time and saying, look, this is, it's not necessarily appropriate to be ashamed now or guilty now of something that happened in the past. So you do have to come to terms with it on a certain level. But anyway, that's my experience. So and yes, I mean, people do deal with that, and there are ways of, as I say, coming to terms with your view of yourself and giving yourself permission to forgive. I think forgiveness is the source of everything, every freedom in life. And at some point, we have to forgive ourselves for our misdemeanors in earlier years.
Yeah, thank you. That's well said. I think that that takes courage too. It takes courage to get to a spot where you realize that you can forgive yourself, because sometimes those particular forces become fuel to drive us forward, and we've reached back and used them as fuel for so long, we don't want to let go of them. Like, this is the reason. I can always turn back to that.
Yeah, yeah. But it's kind of, I think it was one of Nelson Mandela's quotes,
Mm,
like, if I didn't forgive my jailers on leaving prison, I would forever be their prisoner. So
mm,
I think if we do want freedom in life, we
yeah,
do need to, as I say, let go of some of those earlier resentments or earlier regrets, and then just, forgive it all. We might as well.
yeah,
We'll be a long time dead. We might as well do it while we're alive.
yeah. It's well said. When I sometimes I feel as if when I get to talk to you and I get to see so many people who have lived a life where they're coming out and telling their story about things they've done well, things they could have done better, but shining a light, like on the way you're able to shine a light on your stammer and speak so freely about shame and guilt and change and courage. I feel like hopefully we're getting to a point where we're seeing this new rite of passage, where we're seeing people that have lived a full life begin passing down their wisdom to the next generation so they can use it. Is that something that you feel your book is doing? And that, if so, like, how can we get more people to do that?
Well, as I say, when the pupil is ready, the teacher appears.
Mm,
So we can teach a lot and you can share a lot, but the pupil has to be ready. And I'm not sure young people are particularly interested in what gray-haired people have to say or write.
mm,
But you never know. But I suppose my work with the diaries and journals, I have a particularly fondness for the young persons, and it's there are lots of kind of sayings that have been said over the years, and they kind of seep in. It's a sort of by osmosis, but
yeah,
it's not so much telling people anything. It's like having people be either ready or open to listening. And like you said, unless there's some level of desperation, maybe the inspiration is falls on deaf ears. So you do have to maybe wait for the time to write. It's all about timing in life too.
mm,
And but everybody is, if you're just kind of on the lookout for things that might contribute to your
mm.
life, that's what I say. Sometimes we resist contribution. We kind of say, no, we don't want that. No, we don't want that. No, we don't want that. And I think, well, maybe it could be interesting, or maybe it could, maybe it could be of benefit. So just kind of, as I say, when the pupil is ready.
Yeah, I like that saying. What about intention? When we think about what we intend to do, like when you look back at the book or maybe even something from your life, what role does intention play in finding a better way for yourself?
Well, intention is pretty important. We're not always aware of our intentions. I think I'll go
Yeah.
back to awareness. we might have, we might have. Anyway, we're just not always aware of our intentions. Our intentions may be subconscious,
Yeah.
or they may be conscious. So certainly, bringing attention and intention. I think there's a saying about that, but it does, it allows us certainly to be focused and really hope that, your intention is fulfilled, and then a lot of the times we're upset in life when what we've intended, didn't happen, or, was thwarted in some way. And then we think, well, were we really intentional about it? Like, really, did we do everything? Like, really, were we intentional, or were we sort of intentional? We really intended to do it, but, not really. Something else got in the way. So, yes, intention is very important. But as I say, are we always aware of our intentions? I
Yeah.
certainly wasn't aware of my intention to write a book. I didn't even really have an intention to write a book. I just wrote a book, and but now I have an intention that people maybe hear a bit more about it and perhaps read it. And my intention would be that they would get some value from it. Yes, but that's up to the reader.
Yeah. Did you have when I do the podcast, or when I talk to a lot of other people, sometimes people mention that you should be aware of your audience when you're writing something, or when you're going to put out a message. It's imperative to understand your audience. But that seems in contrast with when the people are ready, when the pupil is ready, the teacher will show up. That seems sort of like a paradox there. My opinion is that the message gets out to the people that need it, that want to listen, that are there. They're going to find it. But if you write for a specific audience, sometimes it feels like you're losing authenticity because you're trying to do it in a performative way when you look for a certain type of audience. What are your thoughts on like that particular sort of paradox?
Yeah, I agree with that. Look, people write for all sorts of different reasons. They write
Right.
different kind of books for different reasons and for different audiences.
Right.
Again, I'm probably back to self-expression. Like, I wrote a book
I like that.
really not for myself. I mean, I'm not consider I wrote it for myself, but I wrote it because, number one, somebody asked me to and said it would be a good idea. I have to go back to that. Otherwise, it would never have occurred to me. And then number two, then it is about self-expression, and it really is saying what it is that you want to say and the way that you say it. And with luck, with serendipity, it would fall into the hands or the ears of somebody who will get the value that you want to give. And we can't change the world, but you can change maybe one person at a time, one reader. It could just be one sentence in the book. You never know, but at least it's your self-expression. You've written it down. It's authentic to you.
Mhm.
Whereas when you're trying to be very, focused on who you want to influence, well, that's really hard, because, the world is a big place. So like you said, I think the person who needs to hear it will hear it. And really, that's just, yeah, we can certainly help to maybe put it out there and reach more people. I suppose now, today's world, it is very noisy out there. And I'm sure there are wonderful books out there. And if I could read them, they might make a huge difference for me, but I may never even know about them. So, how much effort does one person make?
Mhm.
As I said, not everybody. So yeah, I'm just, it's luck, or it's serendipity, or whatever it is that has it fall into the hands or the ears of the person that you really would get benefit from it. Or just enjoy it. You don't even need to
Yeah.
get benefit.
Yeah, I like that. It's sometimes when we create these ideas of writing for an audience, or I guess on some level, it's necessary to set the stage for the life you want to live. Like, you have to set up these ideas in your mind, or move out on the path. And here we go. We got our first question coming in, Eileen. They're coming in from New Jersey here. This is from Clint. He says, if you had to confront the truth that you may have lived parts of your life just to please others to avoid discomfort, how would you begin to reclaim it as yours?
Well, always good to admit it first. And think, oh gosh, did I, right? And then,
Yeah.
okay, so, well, I'm still here. Do I want to do anything about it or not? So, you can always, like, tomorrow's a new day, I've known, people who decided to go live in another country, and they've done that. Like, people have decided to, like, get married, get divorced, have a baby. I mean, people make decisions. It takes courage to make decisions, and it takes courage to change the pattern of a lifetime. But, people do it. Like, and as long as you're alive, you can do these things. Now, whether you're willing to do them or not, it's entirely,
Mm,
that's another matter. But for most of us, we can. And I love the saying that says, we're free to choose. We're just not free from the consequences of our choice. So our choices have consequences, but we're still free to choose. So, if we have, if there's some frustration or some upset or something that you want to change or something do differently, now's a good time. Because no matter when you're going to do it, it's going to be now. It just happens to be now. Now.
Yes, there's no time like the present, and
No time like the
what better
present.
time?
They
Yeah,
said the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The next best time is now.
yeah, yeah. It blows my mind. So in your book, you talk about waking up to our own potential. What does that look
Mhm.
like for you? Is there a version of you've been avoiding waking up to because you fear who you'll need to become?
No. I can't say if I was going to answer that question. I'm putting the finishing touches to my next book, which is called
Nice.
Embrace the Edge.
I like it.
Life is bigger when you say yes. So I've just found myself saying yes to very unusual things recently. And I'm actually really just enjoying opportunities that are opening up that I never would have expected. I ended up like last month delivering, leadership training in Uganda
Yeah. Whoa.
to women in university. And it was like, I never I never knew that was somebody was going to ask me if I would do that. And I kind of thought, well, okay. So it's like, I don't know, the next opportunity. There's very little that I say, not that I say no to I mean, I don't say no to I don't say yes to everything, excuse me.
Yeah.
There are things that I say no to, but in things in terms of that are going to be like interesting in life or something new that I could learn, and like that could be really interesting. Like that could be exciting. That could be an adventure. How could I make that work? What would I have to do to make that work? Because that's something I really want to do. And so, yeah, I kind of no, there doesn't really seem to be anything. I'm quite happy to kind of observe, see where I'm going to be in like 3 years, 5 years. I know there's goals and all that kind of thing. I don't really have you know particularly set goals like I have to do X, Y, and Z. But you never know what invitation is going to come up that's going to say that's going to be new, and I think, oh, I'd like to be free to accept that one, and do that. So that's me. I have the luxury of being retired. Let's face it. But even
Yes.
declaring myself as a writer, that was kind of a challenge. I never really said I was a writer before, and then I kind of said, actually, no, I'm a writer because I've written a book. I'm actually a writer. So that's given me a whole other. Here, I end up being on podcasts
Yeah.
about a book that I would never have done had I not written a book. So, life just unfolds if you let it in these ways. If you kind of stay true to really what it is that you really like to do.
That's great advice. And it brings up this idea of sometimes people can really get stuck or weighed down with the idea of uncertainty. Like this, like, oh, I don't know what's going to happen. What if I do this? What if that? And then you get stuck there sometimes. But you've
Mm.
alluded to saying yes to things that are interesting to sort of be an antidote to that. Maybe you could talk a little bit more about your relationship with uncertainty and how people may work through that if they find themselves getting stuck.
Well, look, the world is uncertain. It just is uncertain. I mean, there's nothing
Right?
certain about. There's nothing certain.
Right.
Yeah, okay, the sun will come up tomorrow, we hope, and it will go down in the evening, and that's about it. But really, we think that there's certainty, and then we've become very accustomed to thinking that we can predict with certainty what's going to happen.
Yes.
Now, we can predict with a certain degree of certainty what's going to happen if we keep doing the same thing that we're going to do. So we predict with uncertain. I could predict with certainty that I could walk, from here to the shop. But I could walk a different way. I could decide to go to a different shop. I could take an uncertain route. I could take a whole new route and be, it's like I could go to a different shop and I would be very uncertain as to whether, I could find what I wanted in there. So I think, as I say, we could give ourselves a little bit more freedom around uncertainty and be not as threatened by it and be a little bit more curious about it. And that might make, this passage through life a little, it's not certain. None of it is. I don't think it's certain. I mean, certain things are certain. But as they say, the one thing that's certain in life is it's uncertain.
And I feel like there should be a series of great events just as likely as there may be a series of bad events, but yet we put so much focus on like the poor events that could happen. Like, why can't these great things happen just as much as these bad things can happen? If you focus on those great happy accidents that happen, like if you take a different path to the shop, who knows what kind of beautiful things you can see? Who knows what lies before you if you're willing to take a chance and take that different route, right?
Mm, yeah. And it's that's where the courage is,
Yes,
Like, if
yes.
you're afraid something is gonna happen, you're gonna stop yourself because you're
Yeah.
afraid it's gonna happen. You're afraid the worst thing is gonna happen. What's the worst that can happen? Like, really? So that's the fear. That's what I'm saying. It takes a bit of courage just to kind of, well, let me see what's gonna happen. Let's see what's on that
Mhm.
new route. I wonder what, somebody else could, it's like I think if we can live a little bit more in uncertainty and wonder, we might have a little more, and look, stuff happens. I've been around the medical world for a long time. I know stuff happens. And I know, accidents happen, disease happens, illness. It happens. We have to just deal with it when it happens. But until then, we can, live with a little bit more confidence, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, I wish that we on some level, I was talking to a friend of mine the other day, and this is sort of a epistemological question, but he's like, "George, it's the fear of death that causes everybody. Everyone's just afraid of dying. That's why we have all these problems out here, George." And I know it's kind of a big sort of a question out there, but do we in the Western world have a problem like fearing death? You think is that what leads to so many people maybe not living a life that's meaningful or fulfilling?
I don't know. I, I don't know. I personally don't have a fear of death.
Right.
I would have a greater fear of, well, that saying, died at 30, buried at 90.
No, I don't. I
So
don't.
there's aspects of us that die, and that's
Okay.
the
Yeah.
problem. So I think it's like it's the aspects of our own, self-expression, our own joy. If that dies, then that's more to be feared than actual, bodily death. I mean, that's when we're gone. Talk about awareness. I mean, we're gone, right? We might leave upset in people afterwards, but we're not here to be upset. But the fact that we can live kind of upset because we're afraid of taking chances or we're afraid of, you know, uncertainty, then something else dies. And that's kind of sad, because maybe we kill it off ourselves and really don't do that.
Yeah. The amputation of the human spirit on some level.
Hmm.
And you can see it.
Hmm.
You can see it sometimes. And
Can see
but
it.
then
And you can see it other people killing off in other people as well,
yes.
people, they kind of and younger people or children, you see that kind of resentful streak.
Yeah.
So I'd say try not to do that. Encourage
Yeah.
people. Hmm.
Try to blow on the embers of that internal
Mm,
fire to make them
yeah.
see how beautiful they are. What's possible? What's around that corner? I
Mm.
don't know. Let's go figure it out.
Let's go figure. Exactly. Yeah. Take all that childhood innocence and all that childhood exploration before somebody said,
Yeah.
"Oh, you shouldn't do that."
Yeah. Yeah.
Mhm.
I feel like there's a force out there that's here's an interesting question that I ask to people sometimes. I'm curious to get your opinion. Sometimes in life we feel like something is pushing us, and sometimes we feel like something is pulling us. Do you feel that like does that happen to you, or do you feel more pulled than pushed, or any thoughts on that?
I don't feel neither pulled nor pushed. I I think we're always kind of looking. no more than looking ahead. We're sort of looking ahead a little bit because we're, designed that way. We've eyes that look
Yeah.
out. So we are looking ahead. But then we're always kind of a little bit pulled back by things that we think we know or things that have happened in the past and these
Mm.
little fears. So even though we're programmed, to look out and listen outward,
Yeah.
our little brains have it kind of connected and sort of trapped a little bit. So um, I think as Rumi says,
Mm.
be pulled by what you love, not driven by what you fear. So even to notice that or be aware of that, like you allow yourself to be pulled a little bit by your vision or your, you know, kind of wonder for the future, and maybe not so much driven by things that you fear, and let that go a little bit and lighten up a little bit and see, could we could we look out and think, and all these things like vision boards, I'm a big fan of those, and just romanticizing and think, what could be, what could be, what could be.
Yeah. I don't know if anybody said it more beautiful than the Sufi poets. Like, they really had a way with words that makes you feel, wow, this is amazing and beautiful. Who are obviously that they inspired you? Who are some of your other inspirations that sometimes you turn to?
Um, well, over years of compiling the diaries, I would be, but I really, interesting people. I mean, we think like Helen Keller. Helen Keller was blind,
Hmm.
deaf, and dumb. She was an amazing person. So I
Yeah.
would quote her, you know, um, someone like Nelson Mandela, Gandhi, yeah, Rumi, some of the philosophers, Einstein,
Yeah.
Aristotle, Camus. I'll find, it's like if I find the sentence that I think is a sentence that will inspire or empower or encourage somebody, it's the sentence that I like. Uh, because I do say in the book, I locked myself into a life with my own sentence. My sentence
Mhm.
was, you can shoot me, you can jail me, but you cannot make me speak. That's not a good life sentence. Better to get another empowering sentence, or a sentence that will actually, light you up. So we can all choose our sentences. I've written a whole book. There's thousands of sentences in
Yeah, I love it. Eileen, we
there.
have charged through an hour and it felt like 2 minutes. I've always find that to be an amazing mark of a conversation. And I feel like we just kind of scratched the surface of it. But before I land the plane here, where can people find you? What do you have coming up and what are you excited about?
Well, they can find me. My book, The Courage to Shine, is on Amazon. My website is eileenforrestal.com. My Embrace the Edge should be out, hopefully, next spring.
Nice.
And I have a new set of cards, deckable called Pocket Pearls. My
Nice. I like
pearls
that.
of wisdom and pocket power.
Hmm.
So yeah, that's where you can find me. So my website or Amazon.
So, ladies and gentlemen, hang on briefly
Sure.
afterwards. Elaine, I still want to talk to you for just a moment, but to everybody within the sound of my voice, please go down to the show notes, check out the website, check out the new book, Courage to Shine. Be ready for the new book coming out, and reach out to Dr. Eileen if our conversation resonated with you. She's an incredible individual with a lot of life experience, and she's here to help. So do yourself a favor and reach out if you feel compelled to. And to everybody who spent some time hanging out with us today, thank you so much for your time. That's all we got. Aloha.